So some of those war scenarios, like the Fashoda crisis, is going to be between Britain and France. There's going to be a clash in South Africa, and it's because there's this discovery of gold and diamonds in the Boer Republic. And so what's going to happen is that you're going to get the clash between the British and the French, and it's basically over who can control the diamonds and the gold. And so it's the Boers versus the British. The British are actually going to introduce concentration camps. I know you kind of like associate that with World War II, but concentration camps are really a very old concept. I mean, concentration, you're concentrating, you're putting one person or one group of people in an area. I mean, it was used during the Spanish-American War in the 1898. The Spanish Empire, they'd been doing it. They'd been doing it to their colonies. And so the British do it here in the Boer War. They're going to use concentration camps. And what you kind of see happening is a very brutal, cruel kind of control of areas is being used by the Europeans. I mean, concentration camps, they're putting you in some location, and they never put you in a good location. They put you in a location where you basically are meant to die. Either you die because of cold, starvation. I mean, this is what ends up happening. I mean, like Hitler does the death camps, and I mean, like that is something that eventually happens because of the concentration camps. So we're on the colonial system. So the philosophy of colonialism: might makes right by direct or indirect rule. And so what you're kind of talking about is indirect rule is only good if locals are cooperative. So you can do an indirect rule if the local people are okay and they're obedient and they cooperate with the kingdom or with the government that's ruling over them. Direct rule is what you have to do when they're not cooperative. And so this is the question that the colonial powers asked themselves in Africa: assimilation and association. Remember, assimilation, you make like, but they're never the same. And then association. So the French are going to kind of use a policy of assimilation and association. They will do collaboration, they'll do cooperation. So they'll leave local traditions alone, but at the same time, they're going to want the people to adopt some of the French stuff. So France and Vietnam, they're going to start an association policy, and they're going to try to assimilate. They're going to try to get the Vietnamese people to assimilate, but ultimately they're going to have to start relying upon force because the Vietnamese people, they pretty much resist this kind of stuff. I mean, they did it with the Chinese when the Chinese came in back there in period 3. So they're going to resist the French kind of rule. So the French will have to do it by force. Areas that do actually resist this like philosophy of colonialism: Burma, Vietnam, Nigeria, and Morocco. And this is kind of where cohesion and tradition are really dominant in. So you'll have places: Burma, Vietnam, Nigeria, Morocco. They resist it, and it's kind of because their traditions there have been dominant and have been consistent over time. So Vietnam, they had overthrown the Chinese, and so it's just one of these things where they do have a policy of kind of sticking together. The British are going to oppose assimilation, and they're going to assume that colonial people are culturally and racially distinct. And the U.S. is going to do assimilation in the Philippines. So the British oppose it, but it's not that other people don't. I mean, the French, they want to do association. It doesn't really work. So then they try to do a forced assimilation. And the Vietnamese people will still do resistance. But I mean, like, it's resistance with violence. And the British are going to really oppose it. Colonialism in action is going to vary. The French are usually going to impose a centralized administrative system. So the British, though, they'll try and transform local aristocrats into British gentry. So they'll take like the landed wealthy in the area and they'll kind of turn them into British citizens. Also in India, they'll do this. In Africa, they have fewer economic rewards, and so they treat it differently than places with greater economic possibilities. So in Africa, there's just not that many economic rewards like with the British in India, so they don't really have those options. So they'll treat Africa different. So India under the British Raj, the benefits of the British Raj, you're gonna have them bringing order to India. They're gonna end the civil wars. So when Britain is really ruling, they're relatively honest and they have an efficient government in place. There's going to be more educational opportunities in India. The Indian elite, they can train for British jobs so they can get into the civil service. They just got to take the civil service exams. Girls are also going to get a bit of an education, and that was really to kind of make them better wives and better mothers. They're gonna outlaw the sati, where the widows jumped on the fire and they burned themselves as part of their custom, their tradition. The British didn't understand it. And they're gonna reduce the thuggies. The thuggies is just a group of thugs. That's how we get the word thugs. And they're criminals and they're robbing people. They kill people and they do horrible things. They're really awful. And so the British are going to actually stop the thuggies and they're going to allow widows to remarry. So the British are introducing some Western kind of influences, some Western changes. They're also going to introduce railroads, and that's kind of to help facilitate trade. They're going to do the telegraphs, and again, that's about trade and it's about communication. They'll do the postal service, so trade, communication. They're going to have a new penal code, so a new prison system, and they're going to impose health and sanitation conditions in India. So the cost of colonialism, it does increase dramatically. I mean, if you're doing all these introductions of all the stuff, I mean, there's economic costs. Now the British rule, and they introduce cheaper British textiles, so they're bringing in cheaper cloth. They're going to ruin the local textile industry, and that's why they're bringing in the cheaper cloth. Um, the other stuff that they're going to do is they have local officials are going to use the Zamdiyar tax collection system, and that's going to worsen conditions for the peasants. So they really are going to tax the locals severely. They're going to introduce some democratic institutions, but it's really not with a whole lot of effort. There's very little effort to actually keeping them in there and doing it. There's a psychological cost that the British have because the British are pretty arrogant and they have a lot of contempt for the Indians. They don't believe that the Indians are their equals because they believe in that Anglo-Saxon superiority. And I told you guys, I know that you love the Jungle Book, but Rudyard Kipling's Jungle Book kind of shows you the British arrogance and the contempt for the Indians. I mean, he's kind of, I know you guys think it's like a positive story, but he's really kind of making fun of India. It's going to lead to a cultural collision for many, and that E.M. Foster's A Passage to India. What you're kind of seeing happen is some British people are going to realize that maybe what they're doing is wrong, but then you got people like Rudyard Kipling that they're okay with it. The caste system, the higher ups, they're going to be offended by the British thinking that they're better than them. I mean, like, they remember the caste system, the people that have been high up, they've thought for years that they're better than other people. And, they're offended by the British arrogance to think that the British, are better than everybody else. When you look at that tax system, they're taxing agriculture. That's the Zamdiyar system, and they're creating a landed aristocracy. The local gentries, the local ones, they just taxed the poor and took the land. And so you're starting to have a lot of problems. The British also, when they introduced that textile, the cheap textile, they kind of take away jobs from women. It cost the women of India their jobs because the women were doing all the textiles. So when you look at colonial regimes in Southeast Asia, there's an economic profit, that's the aim, but it normally is going to go through an indirect rule. So they're not necessarily going to always be in the people's face. administration and education. Indirect rule is not always possible. Some of the local people are going to kind of do a little bit of a resistance. The British are going to abolish the Burmese monarchy, so they get rid of it, and they're going to rule directly in Burma. In Vietnam, the French are going to rule the south directly, and the north, they're going to have an indirect rule through the Vietnamese emperor. It's going to be the same in Cambodia and Laos. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I was trying to get it bigger for you guys to see. I was looking at it and it looked kind of small. So all the colonial regions are slow, and they're slow to create democratic institutions or to adopt any real educational reform. And the biggest reason why is they fear rebellions. I mean, if you're educating the people and you're telling them that they're equals, I mean that means that they don't have to follow you anymore as a colonial rule. And they're going to educate the natives, and the education is meant basically to be, a servant. It's meant for you to go ahead and stay mellow, not rebel. And there's going to be economic development. It's slow. Basically, it's slow because there's just cheap goods that are wanted out of the areas. In colonialism in the countryside, Shanghai means that your workers you get workers through like unscrupulous means. When that term Shanghai comes out, it kind of means like you almost get kidnapped and you're forced to work, and you're getting workers through like unscrupulous means. Like they also give them like alcohol. Um, they force drugs on them. They kidnap them. So this is kind of where you get the economic development and the colonialism that kind of creates in Southeast Asia. So when you look at colonialism in Africa, I'm going to try and make it bigger. They're going to have a very indirect rule as well. The British are going to be in East Africa. There's a lot of Europeans who are settling in East Africa because the climate's just a little bit nicer. Kenya has a lot of white Europeans that are going to settle there, and they want self-rule. They're going to be denied, and they're going to be denied to avoid racial tensions. So the Europeans that settle in Kenya, they want like their own like rule in their own country, and Britain's going to say, not going to happen. And they're going to say that because of the simple fact that it would cause racial tensions. The British are going to rule in South Africa too. They have a really high European population as well, and so you're going to have the Union of South Africa. Direct rule, the French are going to do it, and they're going to have assimilation in the area. You're going to get some emergence of anti-colonialism, which is really going to happen post-World War II. Post-World War II is really when you see a lot of African countries becoming countries that no longer have colonial rule over them. So you get the stirrings of nationhood. And you are going to get traditional resistance. There's going to be a precursor to nationalism, and you get the Saipan Rebellion. And this is in the Sudan, and it's led by Mahdi, who's going to be put down by the British. And that's imperialism.